All right. Hello and welcome.
Hello.
Hello, Coralie. Did I say
Hello.
it right that time?
Yeah, that's really good.
I practiced it several times and I have a feeling I'm going to revert back to the American way of saying it.
That's okay. That's
Right.
absolutely fine. Yeah.
Thanks for that. Thanks for being accommodating to my handicap of being American. All right. Well, welcome. This is a real pleasure for me to have Dr. Corley Mills here with me. And yeah, so I'm just going to do my rendition of your bio. Shouldn't be too far off, I think, if that's all right.
Okay, of course. Thank you.
All right. Yep. Here we go. So Dr. Corley Mills is a dendrochronologist, woodland heritage, and environmental specialist. Corley leads the consultancy Dendrochronicle, where she works amongst the oldest forests and woodlands in Scotland, and uses her expertise in dendroarchaeology to date Scotland's oldest buildings. Her work has greatly extended and patched holes in the region's tree ring record, as well as led to surprising discoveries of the origin of timbers used in ancient construction. She is the first dendrochronologist to follow me on Twitter, and I've been her #1 fan from across the pond ever since. Corley, it's an honor to have you on and an absolute privilege to chat with you today. So welcome.
Well, thanks so much, Joe. What a lovely introduction. And it's an absolute pleasure to speak with you. Thank you.
Thank you. So if you want to just start us off with who you are and what you do and how you got into what you do, that'd be great. And just take it any direction or form you want to take.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Well, I had my head deep in contributing to a research framework just before we came into the call. So I'd have to say I'm a little unprepared, actually, but I'll just sort of say what first comes into my head. And I suppose some of where I'm at happened by complete accident, really. I grew up in the south of England. It was never a plan to work in Scotland. That just kind of happened by accident. I was offered work here in what was then called the Central Excavation Unit back in the late 1980s, just after I finished my PhD at Sheffield University, and that's in England. So I came up to Scotland on short-term contracts, basically, and never imagined that I'd be staying all this time, and in fact making a home here and having a son here, and you know, it becoming my home really. And I wouldn't want to live anywhere else now. So yeah, so originally I come from Dorset, which is right down on the south coast of England, and my mum really was the person who started up my interest in nature and the countryside. We were not rich, we were far from rich, we were quite poor, and one of our favourite sort of pastimes on a day off would just to go for a walk in the countryside. And my mum knew a lot of the folk names for plants and knew a lot about sort of countryside. She was really interested in the history of the countryside, actually. And I think that's a lot of it really comes from her. And eventually I got the opportunity to go to university, and I did a first degree in environmental plant geography. I don't think that degree exists anymore. I was ever so lucky to find that opportunity. That was at Reading University. And it was really a sort of combination of botany, ecology, and physical geography.
Wow.
With a bit of geology and soils thrown into the mix. But even before I went there, it was the history of the landscape that really interested me. And I was very lucky. Some of the tutors on my degree also had that research interest in landscape history. And 2 of them were pollen analysts, actually. So they had the sort of long time scale picture of vegetation change and sort of the anthropogenic kind of influences on vegetation change. So I was always interested in that. Then after that, I went and worked in London for a couple of years in very boring jobs. Decided that was really not going to be, you know, for me forever. And when I then applied for a master's in environmental archaeology and got a place at Sheffield to do that. So that's really how I got into archaeology. And then when I was there, I got offered the chance to do a PhD in dendrochronology. And that was based on medieval buildings, in particular Exeter Cathedral. And so I had that background then of sort of landscape history, landscape archaeology, environmental studies, and then dendrochronology. And then I got offered, as I said, work in Scotland, which brought me up here, what I thought temporarily, but I'm still here. 33 years later.
Wow.
Yeah.
No, that's fantastic. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, don't be. Keep going. This is great.
Yeah, so I've worked in archaeology, really in the Scottish archaeology sector for most of that time since. But I've always, you know, I've done a lot of sort of managerial jobs within archaeology, but I've always maintained my research interest in dendrochronology and landscape history, I suppose, all the way through. But I kind of went freelance in 2009 and started up Dendrochronicle and have been really doing that sort of work much more full-time since then. And, you know, there's still so much to do and so much to learn, you know. Yeah. Could do with another few lifetimes, actually.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you know, the work that you do is uncovering lifetimes of lifetimes, you know, so it does make sense. Get to everything. Absolutely. It does take a long time and a lot of research. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I have like 1,000 questions and I'll never get to any of them in a chat, much less, you know, the time we have remaining. So I just, my biggest thing is just, I'm fascinated with the buildings you date, the forests and woodlands that you know, date. And so I did watch one of your talks on YouTube where you had really good illustrations of kind of the gaps in the chronology record and tree rings. And it's my understanding that you were able to, with colleagues, of course, and other people, but you were able to fill a lot of those gaps. One thing I have a question about is what gaps are remaining, or what is kind of some target work that you're doing now?
Sure. Well, that's a very good question. We have plenty of gaps still. I suppose I should say, I mean, I know that you have so many native tree species there in North America. I'm absolutely astonished when I see all your marvelous photographs of cross-sections of so many different species. We have a far more restricted palette, should I say, here. Yeah. And the principal species that's been used in construction in the British Isles is oak. However, in Scotland, because we have native pine forests here, but there aren't any of those elsewhere outside of Scotland, really. You know, we have seen the use of pine timber historically as well in Scotland. And so we have been trying to build up the record for oak initially, but then more recently for pine as well across Scotland. Okay. But it's still pretty patchy geographically and chronologically. So in terms of oak, at the moment, I'm working on a gap in southeast Scotland through a research project that's funded by Historic Environment Scotland. And I am trying to extend the native Scottish oak tree ring record for southeast Scotland, so that we could date and identify more native oak. But actually, it's proving a real challenge. Okay. I have the last several hundred years covered with a really old oak wood at a place called Dalkeith, which is just outside of Edinburgh. And that's an old park, and that has old oak trees in it that go back to the 1500s. So I've got a record that extends back to the middle of the 16th century from those trees, from fallen dead trees at Dalkeith, which I was allowed to sample.
Wow.
But extending back from them is proving a real challenge.
Okay.
And I think it is particularly challenging in this part of Scotland because Southeast Scotland was the arena over which wars between England and Scotland were fought repeatedly in the medieval period. And time again, buildings were burnt down. And so our surviving timber record is fairly limited anyway. And then add to that it looks like now, from what I'm discovering in this work, is that Southeast Scotland had to start importing timber probably even earlier than other parts of Scotland. And as you alluded to, we do have a long history of timber import in Scotland, which is also detectable through dendrochronology, because not only can we date things very precisely, but we can provenance the timber as well by comparing our data with a big network of reference data across Scandinavia, Northern Europe, and even now North America. We have some links to North America as well.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So what are you, when you provenance, where are you finding the pines, or I'm assuming pines from Scandinavia, or?
We have oak. The earliest imports are oak, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So as Scotland starts running out of her own oak, especially for big building projects, she starts to import oak from Scandinavia in particular.
Okay.
That's the structural material. At the same time, that is from about the middle of the 15th century. At about the same time, we're seeing import of fine boards of oak. They're called Eastland or Estland boards in the records.
Okay.
And they're beautiful, big oak panels, basically, that were used for carving and for painting. And they come from,
I remember seeing some of these.
I mean, it's exquisite material, and what they were used for is absolutely beautiful work, you know. So we have that really long record of importing oak. So that's really, it starts in the later medieval period.
Okay.
And then, however, in the early modern period, around about 1600, Norway, which is the principal supplier of our structural oak, cuts off supplies of oak because Norway realizes that she is running out of good oak.
Yeah.
And then we see lots of pine in our buildings, on the East Coast at least, and an awful lot of that is imported from Scandinavia. So we switch from oak to pine around about 1600, and that's mostly Scandinavian up until about the middle of the 18th century, so around about 1750-ish. And then there's another switch, and we start seeing pine coming in from the Eastern Baltic. Then,
wow.
And it would have come from through ports like Riga and Memel, and they were drawing on a vast hinterland of natural woodland, basically. So first they were exporting oak, and then later they were exporting pine as well.
Wow.
And, you know, we see all these connections in Scotland. These truly international connections are just waiting to be discovered in our built heritage record, you know.
That is incredible. You know, it's really interesting, you know, serendipitous, because on my way back home after dropping my kids off this morning, I was listening to our NPR, National Public Radio, and they were I didn't get to hear very much, just the intro, but they were talking about medieval period and what misconceptions have, you know, become just kind of societal, you know, understandings and have stuck. And one of the things that they had three medievalists on, and they were all kind of in agreement, just saying, you know, we look at the Dark Ages as just bleak and everything just stopped, and, you know, like everybody went backwards from a Roman antiquity, you know. But they were saying, you know, the opposite's true. You know, there was still trade, there was all this goods being shared, people migrating and immigrating. So that's really interesting because your work talks directly to that. That's really interesting. I mean, the Baltics, that's quite a ways, and travel by sea, and that's fascinating.
Yeah. Well, it's led
this realm is so intriguing to me. Sorry, no, it's so intriguing because for me, my work is exclusively on living trees or dead, remnant wood, like you were talking about, felled trees. And so the human, the social aspect, the archaeology of it is just absolutely fascinating. So go ahead, please.
Yeah, well, it is remarkable. I think there's so many remarkable things about what trees and timbers can tell us, but one of them has to be the ability for us to determine to a year when a tree was felled and where it came from. I mean, that is so precise. There is nothing else like it. It's why I'm such a big fan of dendrochronology, and wish to, hope to see it taken up more in Scotland because it's rather under-supported, surprisingly. Yeah. But the fact that you can determine a felling date to a year, sometimes even to a season, allows you to tie into the documentary record, and so we can work so closely with historians as well because we have that fine resolution in our data, and that becomes very powerful. Then it's a very different story than when you use radiocarbon dating, which of course is very, very useful archaeologically too, but it will not have quite the precision that tree ring dating can give you. And then if you can date something to a year, you have a real potential to correlate what you find with the written record. And that's, that can bring really big new discoveries, I think.
Absolutely. It's so interesting. Some of the articles that I've, come across, I don't remember very many of them, but there are several big instances where tree ring chronologies actually dispel myths or wrong ideas that archaeologists had held, about certain sites, or arguments between geologists and archaeologists, or like you said, there's wiggle room in radiocarbon dating, but a tree is spot on, if it's the right species. And you're talking about oaks, which there's not really a mystery with oaks. It's just about reading those ring widths and getting them right. But yeah, that's really interesting. It's fascinating. I love this realm that you're in. It's really interesting.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, oak is particularly reliable, I suppose, Joe. That's one thing to say about it. I mean, I've worked with both oak and pine, and sometimes pine can be rather more challenging because it can occasionally miss rings out, and that can throw everything off, and you need to do some really fine detective work to kind of figure out where that's happening, But oak is so solid and reliable, Obviously, you can only use it where it survives, but when it does survive, it's really worth doing it,
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a good segue. Talking about survivorship, talking about Scotland running out of her oaks and Norway theirs. So obviously there's shortage, and that didn't stop. I mean, people continue to fell trees, at least like, ancient ones that they needed for construction. So what can you say about the state of ancient forests or woodlands or individual trees even of Scotland now? I mean, what are the pockets, and, or is it a patchwork, or, I just kind of speak to that.
Sure. Well, Scotland is a relatively unwooded country even now compared to much of Europe. But the sort of peak of deforestation, I suppose, with that point would be about 100 years ago.
Oh, wow.
So I think we had, I can't remember the exact figures, but we got down to a few % of woodland cover before the First World War. And what has happened since, well, just after the First World War, is that the Forestry Commission was formed in Britain, and they started a campaign really of reforesting, of planting, particularly exotic conifers, actually. So we're more wooded now, but an awful lot of our woodland cover is exotic conifer plantation from the last 100 years or so.
Okay.
We only have about 4% natural woodland cover, and not all of that. Not all of that is ancient. So the amount of ancient woodland is absolutely tiny, and it's not in, much of it is not in good condition either. We have a particular issue in Scotland, well, there's two particular issues actually, of a very high red deer, well, deer population more generally, is quite a hindrance to regeneration, to natural regeneration of woodland in Scotland. That's one of our principal problems.
Yeah.
And rhododendron, invasive rhododendron is also a problem here, and requires control. So there are quite a lot of challenges in terms of even just maintaining the little bit of natural woodland cover we already have. But of course, on the positive side, we have a lot of conservation agencies working on extending natural woodland cover to meet climate crisis objectives and biodiversity objectives and so on. So there's a hell of a lot of work going on in Scotland to improve the situation. But I think, you know, my little message in all of that is to look after the old stuff as well as creating the new stuff, you know?
No, absolutely.
And in particular, because those little pockets of ancient woodland can be so rich culturally as well as in nature terms. And, you know, there's so much more that we could still learn from studying our oldest woodlands in Scotland.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, you know, I've been kind of seeing a lot on social media about Scotland being kind of a leader in rewilding, or at least efforts to attempt to rewild. I'm not sure kind of the status on it, but you know, that sounds like it jives with kind of what you're saying. There are efforts kind of being stepped up. I mean, is that what you're seeing?
I am seeing that. I'm seeing a lot of interest in rewilding in Scotland. There are some really active groups. There are a lot of charities and non-government organisations like the Woodland Trust and Trees for Life who are really taking that forward. But there are many other groups. There have been quite a number of community buyouts where a large part of the community objectives are about rewilding and reforesting, you know, with natural native woodland cover. So I think we are on the cusp of a big change here, actually.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Feel positive about it anyway.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, you know, there's lots of communities that, you know, in regions that can't say that, you know, it's quite the opposite. So that's really great news. And yeah, I'm totally with you. It's one thing to reforest, afforestation's great, but yeah, I mean, what about the old stuff? Like, we've got to take care of that. That's the history, and it stores so much of important culture and you know, indigenous people, and yeah, it's got to be protected. So I'm definitely with you on that too.
Yeah, and the remarkable thing about some of those old woods is, even though they might not be in great condition now, if they're given half a chance, they will absolutely spring back into life, you know. So you just need to give them that chance, really.
Yeah, no, that's great. So what other issues is there? Is sudden, you know, oak death, is that an issue, or what do you have pathogen issues, or?
Yeah, this is not my area of expertise, Joe, but there are.
Nor mine. I probably said that. I probably diagnosed it wrong there. But.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Sudden oak death is an issue here. The big one, well, a big one is Cholera, which is ash dieback, has spread to Britain from the continent, basically, and has really taken quite a hold with our, you know, native ash tree population. And that's, you know, that's really tragic. However, on the optimistic side, I understand that there's a small proportion of old ash trees which have some resistance.
Oh, that's great.
So there are people researching that at the moment, you know, trying to work out what it is that gives them that resistance.
Yeah, no, that's great. Those lingering ash trees and doing genetics and breeding and back breeding and all of that. That we have, you know, our issue is the emerald ash borer. And it's just devastated, you know, millions and millions and millions of trees. You know, it may be a billion trees. I don't know what it is, but yeah, it's absolutely devastated our ash. But there's a lot of work being done. And I think we have like a couple of or probably not a couple. We have a generation now of trees ready to go that are part of the genetics efforts to, you know, instill some resistance to the emerald ash borer. And, you know, so I think our story is bleak on ash as well, but there's a lot of potential, you know, that, you know, science has done over the past couple decades with it. So yeah, here's hoping. I mean, you know, that's kind of, I guess, like the theme of the world right now is there's a lot of dire consequences just waiting, you know, in the wings, but also lots of efforts, you know, to combat it. So here's hoping.
Yes. Absolutely.
You gotta be hopeful. I mean, you can't be in ecology in any, you know, definition of the word and not have hope.
Absolutely. Yes.
Well, how about some questions?
Okay, go for it, Joe.
All right. So I like to get the most difficult one out of the way first. And this is, what is your favorite tree?
Do you know, I actually think it is old ash. I love old ash trees. I know I expect everyone would think I would say oak as a dendrochronologist. But I have done a bit of work on ash, both old living ash, and we do see occasionally ash timbers in our buildings here. In old crop frames, especially in specific parts of Scotland. So I absolutely love old ash, and I'm just praying that some of the old ash that I know have got some resistance to. Yeah.
Well, I hope so too. Yeah. No, that's fantastic. I love ash trees. They're so great. They're stately trees.
They really are, and they're so useful. They were useful for in just about every respect. You know.
Yes.
You could feed the leaves to your cattle. You could coppice them and pollard them and get useful poles. Apparently, I don't know this for a fact, but you can burn the wood without barely drying it. You know. It's a really, really useful tree.
Yeah, I didn't know that. You know, maybe some wetter ash will still burn. I didn't know that, but I do burn ash, or I used to, anyways. And in the northern parts of the United States and east, there's a lot of dead ash, and you know, it's a really common firewood, you know, because of that.
Right.
And I have burned some, and it does burn really nicely. Yeah.
Does it? Yeah.
I hate to talk about that when you just said it's your favorite tree.
But you know, this is how people would have used it in the past.
That's right. That's right. In context, right?
Yeah.
I'm not targeting your favorite trees. Okay. So I like that. It's a favorite tree of mine too. So favorite fireside food and beverage.
Oh, that's a tricky one.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, well, I'm in Scotland. I've got to say, you can't beat a good dram, really. And and well, the traditional foods of Scotland, of course, are either a curry or fish and chips. So I think I'm going to have to go curry just now. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like fish and chips. I really do.
Good man.
All right. We'd get along then. We wouldn't steal each other's food, so that's good.
We would.
All right. What is one thing that I guess more from the standpoint of like purpose or or like the principle of your work and what you do that you would like people to know? If there was kind of a takeaway, what would that be?
I think it is to ask people to recognise the value of historic timbers and what stories they can tell you, you know, and not just wheak them out of buildings and put them in the skip or put them in the bonfire. You know, they really are precious and they could tell us so much. That's the takeaway.
Very succinctly and aptly done. That was good. Yeah, that was good. All right. If you could go back in time to young Coralie, what do you think that you would tell her?
Well, you know, yeah, I think I would tell her about archaeology earlier on in her life, because I didn't really know about that until quite a long time. You know, I was sort of into my 20s really when I realised that might be a career path for me. You know, I suspect, you know, the conservation, sorry.
That's okay.
Career advisors at school probably didn't know anything about it either. And so, yeah, maybe if I'd come to archaeology a bit sooner, that could have been good. But actually, I don't think I would change that much, actually, Joe, because, you know, I worked a bit before I went to university. Nobody else from my family had ever been to university. Even that was like a flipping huge step, you know.
Yeah.
And then I worked a bit after my first degree before I realised I'd like to do postgraduate things. And then, as I've said, I quite accidentally really came to Scotland. But, you know, it's not exactly a plan, but it all kind of worked out all right, really. You know.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, outside certainly seems so. Yeah, I'm glad that it worked out to where we can sit down today and chat about it because, yeah, what a life. I mean, it seems like a good one.
Yeah.
Oh, speaking of a good life, so I wanted to bring up, as we talked before, your husband Gordon, and so he has, and I wanted to really point this out because anybody that's watching, especially dendrochronologists, he has the first song that I heard him play is called the Dendrochronologist. And I understand there's like a history to that, right? Like, did he write that for you?
He did.
In years past? What is kind of the story about that? It's a beautiful, beautiful flute song, by the way. It's so great. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Well, if anyone wants to hear it, they can hear a little excerpt of it on my YouTube lecture about dendrochronology in Scotland.
Okay.
But I think Gordon has the whole tune up on his YouTube. So he's Gordon Turnbull, and he runs a community Scottish flute organisation called Flute Fling. So if anyone wants to look into it, that's how to look into it. But yeah, so Gordon and I suppose this is a reason I stayed in Scotland. We met on the first excavation that I worked on in Scotland.
Oh, that's cool. Okay.
In 1987, and I'm pretty sure he wrote that tune in 1987. Fairly soon after we met.
Yeah.
So yes, he did write it for me, and it's called the Dendrochronologist. And yeah, I feel greatly honoured to have a tune written for me and for our profession. You know.
Yeah. No, absolutely. No, it's a great one. It should be like the banner song, you know, for all dendrochronology. It's great. It really is good.
Oh,
yeah. Thanks for sharing that. That's so cool that he wrote that for you. So that was pretty shortly after you met. It must have been, huh?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
But his dad is from Glasgow, but he'd grown up all over the place and not in Scotland.
Okay.
So he'd sort of come back to Scotland at that point as well. And it's just, you know, it's another one of those chance things that we, you know, happen to be on that same excavation.
Yeah. Well, another reason not to change anything from the past, right? I'd have messed that up. Might have never gotten the dendrochronologist. All right. Oh, that's great. What a great story. I like that. Okay. Let's see. I don't know if you have an answer to this, and I get about 50-50 on this question. Okay. Right. So do you have someone, if your life was turned into a movie, who would you want to play you in that movie?
Oh, goodness me. I haven't thought about that, Joe.
Okay. That's really one you need a heads up. I mean, I don't think a lot of people have thought this through, you know?
No. No. No, I can't. Maybe
Okay,
something will
all
pop
right.
into my head, but I can't think just now. I'm not. I mean, my life feels quite interesting to me, but I'm not quite sure it's movie worthy anyway.
Well, you know, The Dig. Have you seen The Dig yet?
I
It's on
have
Netflix.
actually.
Okay. I mean, you know, archaeologists and dendrochronologists. Why not? Why not a movie about a dendrochronologist, right?
Yeah, it's about time, isn't it?
It is. It is. First The Dig, and then we'll have The Tree.
Actually,
I don't know what it would be.
Joe, that is a good. Now, any filmmakers listening, About Time is a good title, don't you think?
Yeah, About Time. Oh my goodness. Well, you've heard it here first, and this was the humble beginnings of About Time. I like it. All right, cool. All right, so we don't have an answer to that, but I don't either. So like I have this question, but I don't know the answer either, so that's okay. No judgment. Do you have a book that you're reading currently, or a favorite book, or both?
Well, I have lots of favorite books. It's like you can't pick a favorite child, can you? You know.
Yeah, no. That's why these are so difficult by nature.
You know, I could tell you about novels I've read, and I've read lots of great writers in my time, but actually these days I barely ever read a novel. If I had to save one book from my collection, I'm going to show you what it is. It might look backwards, I don't know.
A History of the Native Woodlands of Scotland.
Yeah.
What are the years there?
Sorry, what year did you say?
Yeah.
Oh, the years. 1500 to 1920.
Wow.
And it's by Professor Chris Smout and some of his colleagues.
Okay.
And he's a historian, an amazing historian, and very luckily for us, he took up a great interest in environmental history and woodland history in particular. And his books, there's a number of books about the history of Scotland's woodlands, and they are amazing.
Yeah, I bet so.
I go back to this book so often, you know.
Okay.
It is always within reach.
Yeah. Well, it literally is, isn't it? That's great. Well placed. All right. Very cool. Do you have a favorite scientist as a figure, or if not, then maybe somebody most influential in your career and also life?
Well, actually, I'm going to have to give a shout out to a teacher here, I think. Okay. I had a really, really great biology teacher at my secondary school. She was called Mrs. Tarraway, and she really encouraged my interest in biology and the natural world. She was brilliant. And you know, here's to all the science teachers out there. They do a great job. You know, most of us wouldn't have got anywhere without them giving us a good start, you know. Yep. So yeah, science teachers the world over.
Yeah, I like that. Cheers to them. Yeah, you know, yeah. It brings up a favorite of mine. My best friend growing up, his name was Kyle Welburn, and his dad was Billy Welburn, who was my chemistry teacher. And although I know next to nothing about chemistry anymore, I wasn't that great of a student really ever, especially in high school. But he had a phrase he would say every day, multiple times a day in class. He would always say, "Pay attention to detail, pay attention to detail." And he would repeat it over and over every day. And yeah, I mean, as a dendrochronologist, what better advice than pay attention to detail? And that's me really well as a person who really thinks more big picture. that was grilled into my brain, and yeah, it served me well. And if it weren't for that advice, I probably wouldn't be able to do that. So the science teachers,
Great advice. Yeah.
absolutely. It's simple, and everybody says it all the time, but when you're a child and that's impacting your brain every day, it sticks. Yeah. All right. So if you had to be a tree or some other plant, what one do you think you would be? Would it be the old ash, or would it be something different?
Do you know?
This is a fun one. I like this one.
That is a fun one.
Yeah.
I mean, for longevity, I'm probably going to have to go with the oak, actually, or possibly even the yew tree. Wouldn't it be amazing to be around as long as a yew tree?
Yeah, absolutely. I like that. That's cool. Anything in particular you like about yews, other than they're amazing trees? So I'm curious, other than longevity.
Well, I think in these islands, it's because they have such a long-standing cultural association. They are associated quite often with early Christian sites in Ireland and Britain, including Scotland. And the other thing, of course, is that they were probably they may have been planted at Christian sites, but they were probably also sometimes planted for material for longbow making, and that goes way back here as well. So the yew tree has a strong cultural association that goes back thousands of years, really.
Yeah.
And there's so much more we could learn about yew trees in Scotland.
I like that. Yeah, I like those trees that tell you so much more about living and how people lived in the past, other than just in dendrochronology. They're fascinating. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Who would you say has been most influential in your life? Other than the science teachers, of course.
I think my mum, Joe, my mum, a very lovely, gentle person, no longer with us, sadly. But I was raised in a single parent family, and my mum was just me and my sister and my mum, and she was everything, really. She was a lovely person, very gentle, very, very strong advocate for education and reading, and really sort of set me off in the right path, I think, in those respects. So we didn't have a lot materially, but she certainly encouraged quite a rich life intellectually, I suppose.
Yeah, well, that's easy to believe after seeing you and meeting you. So what an honor you've been, in your mother's memory, for sure. So I like that. Thanks for sharing that. Do you have a favorite science or life quote?
Favorite science or life quote? I don't.
Or a saying, or a motto, or something like that.
Do you know, the first one that comes into my mind is "Look before you leap."
Yeah.
I'm not sure I've always followed it, but yeah.
Yeah, no, that's definitely good advice. Yeah, it's in line with the whole, think before you speak, or any of those.
Yeah, be a little considered in life.
Yeah, so self-awareness goes a long way, for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, do you have anything else you'd like to say or share before we go?
Joe, I'd just like to say thank you to you. I think this is it's lovely to be involved in this, but I so enjoy seeing you speaking to other people, and it's a great service that you're doing, and a great opportunity to learn about other people's work, but also about their lives, and to connect across many, many miles. I think that's absolutely brilliant. So thank you so much.
Thanks for that, Corley. That's what I love about it too. It's all about connection, community, and too often we see people or see sometimes they're people we never heard of, or sometimes they're the big names that everyone's heard of, and it's so nice to just know a little bit more of about that person and just have some familiarity with them.
Yeah,
So,
it's
I like
really
that. Thank you.
wonderful.
Thanks
Thank
for that.
you.
Well, what is the best way for people to reach out to connect with you?
Well, if they would like to have a look at my website, they're most welcome, of course. And it's simply called Dendrochronicle. It's got all sorts of stuff which I hope is interesting on it. But
oh, it is. Yeah. I like the website. Yeah. I'll link that in the description as well of this video.
Okay. But the easiest way to find me for anyone that uses Twitter is at Dendrochronicle on Twitter.
Yep.
Yeah, so either there or on my website, which also has contact details. So yeah.
Okay, sounds good. I'll make sure that's posted, in the description and everything. And I'll also link Gordon's the Dendrochronologist. And if I can find that video too, where you talk about it, I'll do that. Or if you could send it, either way.
I will. I'll email you that. Yeah, sure.
Excellent. That'll save me some time in finding it. you have lots of great videos too. So and that's part of Dendrochronicle. I think that's your YouTube channel too, right?
Yeah, I've only got a couple of things up so far, but there'll be some more coming soon. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, that's great. This was such a great time chatting with you, Corley. And I look forward to doing this again at some point, if that's okay with you, down the road.
That's lovely, and I'll try and think of the answers to the questions that I could answer.
I'll send you several rounds of questions so you're prepared for everything.
Excellent. All right.
This has been great. Thank you so much.
It's been lovely, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Enjoy your evening, and I'll talk to you on Twitter and around down the road.
Yeah. Look forward to that. Thanks,
All right.
Joe.
Take care, Corley.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.